Well, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou I tēnā ata haere mai. No mai haere mai ki hui understanding valuation governance in Aotearoa. Ko takatumu te waka, ko māo te maonga, ko te awanui te moana, ko Ngāti Ranginui te iwi, ko Ngāti Kāhua ki Taronga te hapo, ko Wairoa te marae, ko ahi tere e toko ki inga, ingere, ko Otatahi toko wahi noho, ngari ko Tauranga toko te rangawaiwai, ko Garigana toko ingwa, narera, kapai to kotora, tēnā koto, kia ora toto katoa. So welcome everyone to today's webinar. We've got a very strong turnout, so hopefully most people are on board at this point. What we're looking at today is understanding valuation governance. Now, I thought this might have been a very dry topic, but actually I get excited about it. But apparently there's quite a few people out there who think the same way, because we actually sold out this webinar a few days ago. So that's a good thing. Okay, so I'd just like to talk about what I intend to cover today, and probably two or three things. Firstly, the relationships and functions of NZIV, PINS, and the VRB. That's the basic coverage. And also what the responsibilities of each of those organisations are, and how that relates to valuer registration, annual practicing certificates, and how and why NZIV membership is mandated, and where PINS fits in with all that, the Property Institute, and associated issues. The other thing is that I'll be talking about membership categories and also post-nominal qualifications. And I'm going to end up talking about fee structures and charges, because that's a fairly big topic and a pretty popular topic. I know PINS get a lot of inquiries about fees and that kind of thing. So it's not all that straightforward, but hopefully today we'll unravel the main issues. So there's two key pieces of, well, one's the legislation and the other one's the regulation. So together they form the regulations, and they're both quite old. So if you want to understand governance and how it works in New Zealand, then you need to understand two things. One is the Valuers Act, which is 1948 Act. There was an amendment made in 1968, but pretty much it's the same as it's always been. And then the second thing is the NZIV rules. So those rules are made under Section 16 of the Valuers Act, and they're adopted, the ones that we have now, at a meeting of the NZIV, the Institute, which was held in 1997, and it was approved by the Minister during that year as well. There were some minor amendments made in 2012, but again, they're fairly old pieces of legislation. Now, it's not that they're the only pieces of legislation that relate to values. There's a heap of them, and I'm not going to go through all these, but I'm just putting up a few there that are significant legislation affecting valuers. You know, things from, annual registration fees and jurisdictions and powers and procedures of the Land Valuation Court, and the Arbitration Act, looking to resolve commercial and other disputes, and the Land Transfer Act, which is fundamental to our torrent system of land title, and also the Local Government Rating Act. So today's session is just concerned with valuation governance and the primary regulations that apply directly to that. So I'm not going to cover everything. I'm really relying on the two pieces of regulations that I mentioned just before. So I'm so thankful for this diagram, which is courtesy of the Valuers Registration Board. Actually, I got it directly from the Valuer General, which shows all the major players in our valuation system and profession here in New Zealand. So these include the Land Information New Zealand, headed up by Damien O'Connor, the Minister, and the Secretary there for Land and Information, and Chief Executive of LINZ which is Gay Serenanke. I hope I said that name correctly. And then we got the Valuers Registration Board and the Office of the Valuer General, Neil Sullivan, the Valuer General, and many of you will have contact with the registrar there, Michelle Doyle. The next one is the New Zealand Institute of Valuers, whose president is Adam Binns, and yours truly is General Secretary. And then we have last list of people involved, I suppose, in governance, one way or another, registered valuers before. So what I'm hoping to do is to go through all those organisations and personnel, I suppose, in a little bit of detail. So first cab off the rank is Land Information New Zealand, or LINZ. So along with the Valuer General, there are another 3 statutory officers involved in administering the survey and legal framework supporting land ownership and valuers in New Zealand. All are responsible to the Secretary for LINZ, Gay Serenanke, and ultimately they're all responsible to the Minister for Land and Information New Zealand, which is Damien O'Connor. So briefly examining each one in turn. So we have the Valuer General, which most of us are familiar with, of course, regulating the rating valuations industry and administering the Valuers Registration Board, and responsible for regulation of registered valuers and issuing practicing certificates. Then we have the Commissioner of Crown Lands, and that person is the landlord for Crown parcel and other lessees, consenting to activities on Crown land, and has other responsibilities under other acts, including treaty settlement legislation. Then we have the Surveyor General, who involved in setting and auditing standards for the cadastral and geodetics survey systems. That person administers place naming and also supports the setting up of electoral boundaries. So a significant role there. And then we have the Register General of Land, who's responsible for the operation of the Land Transfer Act 2017. So it's the land title system, including registration of transfers, mortgages, and other title matters. So the Office of the Valuer General is one of 6 business groups operating out of LINZ. So in addition to these 4 statutory offices I've just gone over, there is also Biosecurity and the Overseas Investment Office. Okay, so I mentioned in my brief overview concerning the Valuer General's role in ratings valuation, the VRB, Valuers Registration Board, and the issuing of annual practicing certificates, or APCs. So other roles include ensuring the district standard roles are maintained to a high standard, and most importantly, sits on the Council of the New Zealand Institute of Valuers. Okay, so moving on to the Valuers Registration Board. So where do they fit into the system is right here. So the Valuers Registration Board is an independent body administered by LINZ. It operates under the Valuers Act. There are other acts that relate to it as well, but it's specifically the Valuers Act 1948. And I've got sort of 3 different sections there that relate to the Valuers Registration Board, depending on whether you're looking at, functions or structures or powers, that kind of thing. You can look that up for yourself, of course. I will be covering a little bit in more detail some of those things. So the Valuer General is the ex officio chair of the Valuers Registration Board. And there are another 4 members appointed to the Valuers Registration Board. They're all registered valuers, and they're appointed for a period of 3 years. But the minister, those appointments can roll over, and indeed, I'm pretty sure that the current incumbents all have kind of keep on rolling over. The important thing here is that it operates independently from NZIV. It's quite a separate organisation, if you like. It's not part of NZIV. Okay, primary functions. I said I'd come to these. The first thing is the responsibility to hold a register of qualified valuers under Section 19 of the Act. The second thing is to provide gazetting of public valuers, that is, those valuers who sign valuation reports for members of the public. They're required to hold an annual practicing certificate, and each year the ones that have been approved and paid their money to the Valuation Registration Board are published in the New Zealand Gazette annually. Now, the next thing is that the VRB is also responsible to hear complaints, and they may discipline registered valuers. So essentially, this means examining a valuer's actions, having particular regard to the profession's code of ethics. The complaints process, it's highly structured, and the process is actually explained on the VRB website. So as that second dot point there, any member of the public can formally apply to the VRB to have a complaint investigated. And the other major function, there are other functions as well, these are some of the major ones. The other major function is accreditation of university courses. And so that's a significant function, and I'll talk a little bit more about that a bit further on. Now, if you're a registered valuer, then you're required under the legislation to be a member of NZIV. The only exception to that is if you have a conscientious objection. And so under Section 11A of the Act, then you will be able, if you want to claim conscientious objection, that's the relevant part of the Act that relates to it. But if you are a conscientious objector, then you're still required to pay the same fees as everyone else to the VRB. So that stops people just doing that because of financial reasons. Now, most of us are familiar with the current registrar, Michelle Doyle. She's been there, I don't know how many years Michelle has been there, but it's a fair while. And she is the main contact point, whether or not it's registration or lodging complaints or finding out about annual practicing certificates, APCs, that kind of thing. Okay, so now we move on to the New Zealand Institute of Valuers, NZIV. So again, we come to our graphic and see where they fit in. So the NZIV is the professional membership body for valuers. It's a separate organisation to the VRB. The current president is Adam Beardens and yours truly, General Secretary. So what are the functions of NZIV? Well, actually, they are fully prescribed under Section 10 of the Valuers Act. And there's 6 functions. So I'm just going to briefly mention what these functions are. Firstly, encouragement and promoting ethical conduct amongst all our members. Also to maintain integrity and status of valuers and members of the Institute generally. It's all about, you can imagine, this is all about providing confidence to the public, really, as well as providing collegiality for the members as well. The next one is to provide opportunities for acquiring knowledge and communicating that in relation to the valuation profession, and also to suggest amendments to the law relating to the valuation of land. So there haven't been too many of those. Also, to provide NZIV can become involved in settling professional differences, and also finally to protect and promote the interests of the profession. And the second part there, which is often under sort of emphasised, is also protecting the interests of the public in relation to valuations of land. So a highly functioning branch network is fundamental to the undertaking of all these institute functions. And NZIV, depending on how you count them, we have approximately 18 branches. So we've got a strong branch network. That's a real strength for us. Okay, Next point to make is that we have the NZIV rules. And the point about the NZIV rules is that it's compatible with the Valuers Act. In fact, Rule 3 of the NZIV rules literally duplicates Section 10 of the Act that we've just seen, the general functions of NZIV. I also mentioned about protecting the public. So NZIV has a role to play in protecting the public, as we've just seen, and it does so alongside the VRB. And I have heard the Valuer General make the comment that the VRB has a higher duty of care in that area, but which I think is a good point. But nevertheless, NZIV has a critical role in that area as well. Okay, the other thing is, in terms of protecting the public, there's a rule there that says that any complaint made against a member shall be absolutely privileged. That is, it's kept confidential, and that's why you'll notice when you see decisions made by the Valuers Registration Board, they'll pretty much always be redacted. The other thing is that the NZIV website explains a lot more, and the whole process of complaints and disciplinary processes and the role of NZIV. And they have in particular, the PCC, or the Professional Conduct Committee, its involvement in this complaints process. Now, this current graphic that I've got up on the screen now, it's been lifted from the NZIV website, whose address is shown on the slide here. So this graphic overviews the professional obligations for valuers. And these obligations represent a set of practices, ethics, and behaviours that NZIV members are required to adhere to. Now, these standards or professional obligations are all very much integrated, and I'll try and explain how that works now. So first of all, we have guidance papers and valuation protocols. So these are developed in the first instance by NZIV's Property and Valuation Standards Board, who progressed these based on expanding upon international valuation standards for applicability here in New Zealand and also Australia. So note that any amended or new guidance papers are subject to verification or approval, if you like, by the NZIV Council. Next, we have the NZIV Code of Ethics. So these form part of the NZIV rules and are literally appended to the NZIV rules. So they are a regulation. Next, we have continuing professional development obligations, and the nature of which are prescribed within the Code of Ethics. So everyone here today will, I'm sure, be aware that all these sets of standards and obligations are frequently agreed to by the NZIV Council, but ultimately they all come under requirements contained in the Valuers Act or the NZIV rules, or both. So NZIV Council represents the interests of the profession, but any changes to the NZIV rules or the Code of Ethics requires the approval of the Minister responsible for the Valuers Act 1948, which is currently the Minister for LINZ, who is Damien O'Connor. Okay, so another function being carried out by NZIV is university accreditation. So the VRB has their accreditation process, so this runs alongside that process there. The reason why NZIV get involved in it is because it helps evaluate the suitability of prospects for people wanting to become members of NZIV. Now, the Property Institute has a similar process, and it also complements the VRB and the NZIV processes. Accreditation visits to all universities take place via a joint delegation from the Valuers Registration Board, Institute of Valuers, and the Property Institute. And their job is to formally assess courses and to influence universities in developing programs that are going to make sure that there are the right quality outcomes, that it's meeting industry demand, and it's also fulfilling, any regulatory requirements. So the university accreditation process is a fairly important part for all three organisations. So next, you might have been wondering, well, who is it that can be NZIV members? Well, the basic answer to that is that if you're a registered valuer under the Valuers Act, you have to be a member of NZIV. So that's it in a nutshell, but NZIV is not limited to just those people becoming registered valuers. In fact, the regulations, or the Valuers Act, Section 11, says that the Institute can let people in for anyone they think is fit, and the criteria that they assess that by, if they're fit, is good character, reputation, hold a certificate that will be recognised by the board, or has passed an examination that's approved by the board. So Section 11, Part 6 of the Valuers Act, says that the council is free to admit those persons having qualifications outside of what might be otherwise strictly required for valuer registration by the VRB. But I have to say, by and large, NZIV members are in the main registered, by far the registered valuers. Okay, I'd like to talk just a little bit about NZIV vision, and that might help you understand a little bit more as to why it's set up the way it is, or why NZIV, the governance, is structured the way it is. So the vision that we have at the moment is to promote the profession, support our members, maintain the integrity of the profession, and protect the interests of the public. Now, in order to do this, there are 4 pillars involved in this strategy: promotion and growth, future-proofing and resilience, code of ethics, and education. So I'm just going to go through each of those pillars, because they each have their own subcommittee, actually, and they're all, the subcommittees are comprised of people that are NZIV councillors. So the first one, promotion, involves the promotion of ourselves, both individually and corporately, along with the NZIV itself. A key part seeks to promote the very wide skill set that nearly all valuers have. Development of a media strategy and a marketing plan are critical elements here. So growth of the profession, growing the profession, is all about numbers. So including the development of a more diverse group of professionals, and also considering the public perception of valuers, all considered critical success factors. Okay, the next one is future-proofing and resilience. So the idea here, or the concept here, is to ensure that the valuation profession remains an integral part of the financial markets here in New Zealand, which they certainly are. So this area addresses a perceived need to modernise our profession, and the nature and role of alternate valuation systems is also covered under this initiative. Then we have the Code of Ethics, and that's considered to form the backbone of NZIV and our profession. The code is currently under review, and Council anticipates an exposure draft for eventual consideration by the wider membership will be available later this year. This exercise is considered good governance and largely seen as one involving, again, a modernising process of a code that has nevertheless stood the test of time very well for many years. So the chair for that one is Jeff Alexander. Now, you would have picked up for the others, Peter Ward and Andrew White are the chair of each of those other 2 subcommittees that I mentioned. And finally, we have the Education Subcommittee headed up by Phil White. So this is considered by Council to be a critical part of the NZIV and plays a big part in why Council is here. Both short and longer term strategies are required in this space. Okay, in addition to the 4 strategic subcommittees, there are 3 others that I'd like to mention here. So the first one is the Property and Valuation Standards Board. Now, this one is chaired by a well-known registered practicing valuer, Blue Hancock. I'm pretty sure most of you will know him, and along with supporting him are another 10 registered valuers who are on the committee. Second committee that I'd like to mention is the Advancement Interviews Subcommittee. So their job is to complete an initial review of applications for associate membership, or the post-nominals NZIV. There is a process document that they stick to. Advices and comments are made back to the branch on the member's application, because branches help prepare the original application. And the advice and comments are made back to the branch on the member's application, and this ensures that the quality of applications is consistent across the country. So I will talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but the aim of associate membership is to improve the standard of the profession, thus improving the regard to which valuers are held by users of our professional services. Okay, the next one is the PCC, or the Professional Conduct Committee. Now, the PCC is chaired by David Patterson, whom is assisted by another 5 registered valuers. More on this a little later, but they have their own terms of reference. So they operate according to fairly strong guidelines. Okay, the next part of the puzzle to mention are registered valuers in New Zealand. I just need a quick drink. Thank you. Okay, so registered valuers. Of course, they're fundamental to the private valuation system here in New Zealand. So I'd just like to talk about some things that relate to specifically registered valuers and how it fits into some of the other structures that I've already mentioned. So first of all, coming to the Code of Ethics. So the Code of Ethics covers the rules that govern our profession and the way in which members conduct themselves. If you breach the Code of Ethics as a registered valuer, then you put yourself at risk to be removed from the Valuers Registration Board register, also forfeiting their membership of the NZIV. So breaching the code can be a really big deal, and can be, put your livelihood in jeopardy. So it's not a good idea to breach the code, because that's the extreme end of sanctioning. What happens is that investigation of a formal complaint against a registered valuer is undertaken. They assess it against what the Code of Ethics says, because remember, the Code of Ethics forms part of the NZIV rules, and the NZIV rules are established under the Valuers Act, and both the Valuers Act and the NZIV rules are subject to ministerial approval. The code requires members to undertake continuing professional development. So it's pretty important that that members take CPD seriously, and pretty much all members do. So again, there are sanctions if you fall foul of that, which is good for no one, actually. Okay, talking about professional competency, in the Code of Ethics, there is a clause there that actually says that every member shall participate in the prescribed program of continuing professional development in accordance with the guidelines that are published from time to time by the Institute. So where can you get these guidelines? Well, if you go on the website here, this is just a screenshot. If you go onto the website, the NZIV website that I gave you earlier on, and you click on to professional obligations, this is what you'll find. And on that page, there is an area there that says a hyperlink for the CPD policy. And then you pull up the CPD policy. I've got a screenshot of the policy here on display for you at the moment. Now, the policy is always kept up to date, and it's always the current one. So when you click on there, you can be confident that this is the current policy, and this is what I need to do in order to comply with CPD. So you can go on the NZIV website, click on to view the policy, and hopefully your questions in relation to CPD will be answered. Next thing I'd like to cover is the ANZIV associate membership scenario, which is really about gaining ANZIV post-nominals. So why do we do it? Well, the idea here is to improve the standard of the profession and also improve the regard to which valuers are held in by users of registered valuers' professional services. So the process to obtain your ANZIV is to complete an application form and then take part in an interview process conducted by the local branch, and they normally get a bunch of or several senior registered valuers to form an interview panel. So the interview process is not really meant to just be a re-examination at registration level. This is not doing the VRB interview process to become a registered valuer all over again. What it's meant to be is a signal that a valuer has progressed from the standard expected that applies to a newly registered valuer to one that has some experience. So, I'd encourage all members who are not currently have got their post-nominals, ANZIV, to actually apply for that. And it is something that's recognised out there in industry as being something worthwhile. And extra letters after your name. Okay, changing tack here. Now, I was sort of tossing up as to whether I should put this in because we are talking about valuation and governance, but I think it's an important point. And that is that there is an organisation known as the Valuers Education and Integrity Foundation, or VIF. And they have their own website, and it was established in 2016, and it had seed funding from NZIV to get it going. So just like NZIV, the VIF have a common interest of advancing education and research. That's what they do in valuation, of course. What they aim to do is support and encourage the supply of data to assist in public policy decision-making by offering research funding for public benefit projects. Now, I've been involved in delivering webinars and providing documentation to VIF before I came involved in this role about 1 year ago. So I can tell you that these people that are the trustees are just great people to work with, and they really have the interest of valuers at heart, which is wonderful to see. So the research and information is provided independent, and it's free of politics. And the goal has to provide a greater body of information, not just amongst valuers, but to the general public and also the Crown. And you can go on the website there and make sure that and see the results of the research because they're made public. So that's the website address there, www.veif.org.nz. So I would encourage you, you can actually subscribe to the website and go from there. Okay, next I'd like to talk about the Property Institute of New Zealand. So to understand the role of PINs, we need to go back and have another look at our VRB graphic and consider how NZIV fits into the valuation governance structure. So PINs exists, at least from an NZIV point of view, to deliver a range of professional services to the NZIV. So PINs and NZIV are therefore tightly connected organisations, but they are separate organisations. So first point to note is that a service level agreement, known as, if you hear people talk about the SLA, that's what that is. There's an SLA between NZIV and the Property Institute of New Zealand, and it contains details on the provision of these professional services, and it's reviewed each calendar year. The SLA sets a fee in accordance with the agreed services involved in professional administration and support provided by PINS to the NZIV. Bear in mind, NZIV operates outside of PINS in various ways and vice versa. Therefore, both PINS and NZIV have various duties and responsibilities which are actually well defined within the SLA. So the president of PINS is Luke Vanderbroek, and the Chief Executive Officer is Viv Gurry, and I'm sure all of you know both Luke and Viv, along with the NZIV President, Adam Binns, who joins Luke on the board of PINS, and most importantly to note, Luke and Adam are both registered practicing valuers. Okay, so NZIV are not the only professional community that PINS look after. There are actually 5 PINS communities. So in no particular order, from top to bottom, first up we have ProMins, the Property Managers Institute of New Zealand. Next on the list there we have NZIV. Then we have ComPro, or the Commercial Property Managers Institute. Then we have IPAC, which is the Institute of Property Advisors and Consultants. And finally, we have PMVI, or the Plant and Machinery Valuers Institute. Now, some members are members of more than one of these professional groups. Okay, so what are the PINS organisational priorities? And this might help you understand why they're structured the way they are. So one of the top PINS priority is to build resilient professional communities, one of which, of course, is NZIV. They also desire to have strong boards and councils, and of course the branch network is integral to this. And I made the point before about the branch network being integral to carrying out functions under Section 10 of the Valuers Act. So that works well. Integrating PINS professional communities into branches, of course, is a priority as well. So that tends to grow resources, builds the volunteers available, and also provides networking. And so the great thing is about PINS is that we have different communities interfacing with one another. So the vision for PINS is to grow its people, its member benefits, and grow its scale. And they're committed to, what the objective is now, to build incredible careers from graduation to retirement. In fact, the focus over the next year is growth across all aspects. Now, I'm not really a spokesman for PINS, but my situation is that I work for NZIV, but I actually report to the PINS CEO, and I'm involved in the national support team there. So I can hopefully reliably give you that information. So talking about personalities, there are a number of points of contact. These are not the only ones, by the way, but they're the ones that you're most likely to have some kind of, maybe not regular contact, but these are the most common ones. So we have Kat Flanagan, who's our general administration and support, and you'll probably, if you ring up our main number, it's probably Kat that you're going to get. There is also Rebecca Van Etten, we call her Bex, and she is the Chief of Staff for PINS, and she is actually the community lead for all 5 communities that I mentioned previously, including NZIV, the interface, if you like. She's responsible for sponsorship and partnerships and education. By the way, these key roles, they have other roles, but I'm just telling you the ones now, or relaying to you the ones that relate to most to NZIV, the ones you'll most likely be using for. Then we have Carlos Castro, who's the Group Financial Controller, accounting and finance, of course. Then we also have a lady by the name of Rochelle Mistledine, and she is Membership Secretariat, and she provides member services. So if you've got inquiries relating to CPD and that sort of thing, then probably you're going to interface there with Rochelle. And then there's yours truly, who I kind of have a registrar role with as part of NZIV, and also there to provide technical support. Okay, so I'm going to finish off now just talking about fees, because these are really important, and that should allow sufficient time for some questions. So if you want to hop on to the Q&A or the chat, if you've got any questions, think about them now, and I'll be quite happy to try and answer them at the end. Okay, so all registered valuers in New Zealand are required to pay an annual registration fee to the Valuers Registration Board. And for those valuers that undertake and sign valuation reports for members of the public, they're required to hold an annual practicing certificate. So if you wish to practice and therefore be gazetted as a public valuer, then you need to obtain and pay for an annual practicing certificate, also payable to the Valuers Registration Board, VRB. In order to be registered as a valuer, irrespective of whether or not you practice, then under the Valuers Act, membership of the NZIV is mandatory. And that subscription is payable to the NZIV. So let's just break down the current fee structure here. So these fees that I'm relating to you now, they're all mandatory. And depending upon whether you're practicing or non-practicing, I'm going to go through each of the fees and who you pay them to. So hopefully this will remove, there is a lot of sometimes misunderstanding as to which fees are payable to who and who's responsible for it. So hopefully this will help clarify this. So first of all, you have the valuer's registration fee. Now this is payable to the VRB. Whether you're practicing or non-practicing, the fee is exactly the same. Now, all these fees, by the way, exclude GST. Then we have on top of that, for those that are practicing and are public registered valuers, you have an additional fee to pay, which is a practicing certificate. So that's almost the same as the valuer registration fee. So when you add those together, you come up with the total fee that's payable to the VRB, which in the case of practicing public registered valuers is $690, and for non-practicing registered valuers is $366 plus GST. Now that fee is due on January 1, 2022. Now for those of you who are practicing, you need to make sure that you pay that on time, because you want to be on the list of Gazette valuers that are going to be included in the Gazette. And that applies as at March. It's submitted earlier and applies at March, and that carries all the way down through to the end of the current calendar year. So that's why that fee is pretty important to pay. All these fees are important, of course. Now, on top of this, we have the NZIV membership subs. So the total payable to NZIV is the same, whether you're practicing or non-practicing. And those fees are payable by December in each year. In this case, for the current year, it was December 31, 2021. So if you add those together, and by the way, before I go on to the grand total, the point here is that the amount payable to VRB is paid directly to the VRB, and they invoice and look after that. And the fees payable to the NZIV are, you might get the original invoice from NZIV, but if there's, you know, an issue with payment or whatever, then that, and the physical payment is actually collected by the Property Institute of New Zealand, of course, acting under their SLA. So just to recap, because this is often a source of misunderstanding, your original invoices are issued either by the VRB or NZIV. The VRB may follow up any non-payment there. NZIV does not get involved in that process. PINS, on the other hand, follows up any NZIV payment on their behalf as part of their obligations under the SLA. So they are the different fees that apply and who you pay those fees to. Okay, just going to finalise. You'll be glad to know this is the last slide. A lot to take in. It's worth mentioning about discounted fees and when they apply. So when we have a look, you know, at the previous slide, that was based on NZIV subscription fees applying for full members, including associates, NZIV, and also fellows. Everyone pays the same amount if you're a full member. However, in the case of overseas members, those holding affiliate association, not associate, affiliate, or approved for a career break, non-practicing or retired, that is, if you're retired, that means that you're in no paid employment, not just valuation, then there are just various fees that apply to you. You can go on the website and check what they are, that will be different than what you saw in the previous table. The other thing is that life members and honorary members, honorary fellows and members, they are complementary. So they're the only ones that get away without the need to pay any fees. So I hope that's been helpful to people. I'm now going to pass, well, I'm not passing over because unfortunately Bronwyn Stark, the person who normally facilitates these webinars, unfortunately she has COVID and is isolating at the moment and not feeling too well today. So that's why I'm having to handle this on my own. So what I'll do, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and come back to you now. And I notice that there are some questions here. The first question, I don't know, I think it's a statement actually. It says, Gary, I see you have an Australian pedigree. Yeah. Often when I do my mihi, you're quite right. Guilty is charged. When I do my mihi, that's why I go ko ahiterea toko kinga, and then I point out, but my Tauranga Waiwai is Tauranga, so which is where my iwi is. So I am of Maori descent, but I did grow up in Australia and I was educated in Australia, and I've taught valuation in both Australia and New Zealand as well. Okay, the next question says, how many local branches do they have there by interest? I think you might mean Australia. Actually, I'm not really all that sure. I mentioned that we have about 18 branches in New Zealand, but many more in Australia. Assumingly, they've probably got at least 5 times that number. But the interesting thing is there that the whole governance situation is quite different. Our governance system is based on nationwide or national legislation. Whereas in Australia, which is very similar, but it doesn't have any, there is no national legislation. It depends on legislation in each of the states. So for example, in the state that I mainly worked in, which was Queensland, they have a Valuers Registration Act that was developed in 1992. And they have their own Valuers Registration Board, and a very, very similar setup to what we have here in New Zealand. Okay, the next one from Brian says, what is the process and purpose of becoming a public valuer versus just being a registered valuer, or are they the same thing? So I think I probably did answer this question during the presentation, but just to clarify the point, the purpose of being a public valuer is that if you complete and sign valuation reports to the public, you have to be licensed as a public valuer. And by a license, what I mean is you have to have an APC, or annual practicing certificate. So they're not the same thing. For much of my life, for example, I've had practicing certificates at times. I don't actually have one at the moment, but I am still registered as a valuer. And there are many people in that situations that are involved in, say, education or governance, or government, or even in private industry. They keep their registration up, but if you want to practice as a valuer, then you have to be gazetted and get your APC and pay for it as well. And do they operate differently to here? I think this is another question relating to Australia. I think I've answered that question. Please let me know if you need more. Okay, now this one here, hi Gary, can you give us an example of what might constitute technical support under your role? So the reason why I've been employed is to bring a registered valuer's lens to the operations of PINs in supporting the operations of NZIV. Now, some of those things, some situations arise. For example, there might be issues involved in continuing professional development, the accreditation of university courses, all those sorts of things would involve ideally some kind of technical support. So that's the technical role that I have. I do actually get inquiries from valuers asking for technical issues that are probably best directed to the standards board, and that's what I do, but at least I'm aware of who is who and where to go and get information. So if I can't answer the question, then I'm able to hopefully follow this up. Okay, next one is an anonymous question that says, as you mentioned under section 10D, the NZIV can make recommendations for changes to valuation acts and regulations. Is there any talks of making changes to the current act to incorporate greater reciprocity for direct NZ registration for holders of overseas valuation registration? For example, RICS registered valuers get direct entry into a number of other countries and vice versa, effectively allowing access to a wider pool of registered valuers, much like the CPA for accountants. However, NZ allows only some discount, which is quite a deterrent for overseas valuation professionals to enter this industry in New Zealand. If registered valuers get direct entry into RICS, then why not the other way around? So this is a really good question. I'll take the first part of it first. Are there any talks of making changes to the Act? Yes, there are some, and we could sort of talk about that, make a special webinar just on that. But in the main, those changes, because we have a 1948 Valuers Act, and the same thing with NZIV rules haven't changed for a long while. Basically, it's about modernising it rather than changing anything fundamental in the Act. There probably are a few technical issues, but in the main, it's about modernising the Act. It's a bit like the Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics has been the same for a long while, but it's really about modernising it. And then the second part of the question sort of follows on from that. It talks about reciprocity between New Zealand and overseas countries. So yes, there are arrangements in place for a number of countries, which is why, in fact, I came over as an academic from Australia to New Zealand and picked up my registration pretty much straight away because of the reciprocity agreement that there is between Australia and New Zealand. But there are other countries as well involved, for example, Singapore and other places. So the full answer to your question is, if there's any intention to expand the list, well, I think if you were to put a case forward for this, I think, I would be really glad to hear from you. Be quite happy to hear from you by email or any other way. But that's a great question, and one that pretty current. The next question is from Matt, and I'm just looking at the time. We won't have time to get through all the questions, but don't worry, because what we'll do is make sure that an email or some communication will go out addressing all the questions that are being asked. So thanks so much for your questions, by the way. These are really good. The next one is another anonymous one. It says, can you please clarify what a public value is with an example and how this differs from a registered value? Well, hopefully I've already answered that question. The next question, I think we've only got time for this final question because we're out of time. It says, what about discounted VRB fees for members taking parental leave, similar to what is offered by RICS internationally? There are provisions for people to take a career break, and you need to put an application into that. So best off contacting the membership secretariat, the details I put up earlier, to organise that. Okay, look, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to get to more questions. We have a heap of questions up there, but I will make sure that somehow we get that communicated. This seminar will be available also online for people who weren't able to make the webinar today, and so you'll be able to have a look at that recording, or for those people who access today's webinar, you'll also be able to have a look at the recording as well and go back over some of the information. So thank you so much for attending today. We have a last minute note from Hamish Bills, and Hamish is saying that's worth mentioning. I think it was in the Q&A, or was it in the chat? Now Hamish says, can you please point out that there is no such thing as a registered valuation? Yeah, I guess what Hamish is getting at there is that we do, open market valuations, we do insurance valuations, we do all kinds of valuations, but it's whether or not the valuation is being completed by a registered valuer. The word valuation is not a protected term, if you like, but registered valuer, I suppose, is. Thank you again, everyone, for attending, and I hope you have a good rest of the day. I'd really appreciate it if anyone has any really burning issues. Look, feel free to contact me. My door is always open, and I'm always willing to talk and to chat and to correspond with people. So thank you so much. Have a great day.